Hi, I'm Lee Arrowood.
And I'm Catherine Pennington.
And today we have kind of a fun event, which is to do some frequently asked questions that we get, FAQs. So Catherine, start us off.
All right, let's see. As a seller, do you have to pay the agent representing a potential buyer?
Very much in the news.
Everyone wants to know the answer to this question. So no, you don't have to. You actually have a few choices when it comes to a buyer's agent and how you might compensate them. You could pay $0 to them, you could pay a percentage of the sales price, or you could offer a set dollar amount. We advise clients that it really is marketing of your listing. You want to reach as big an audience as possible, and so offering compensation to the buyer's agent brings agents and their vetted clients through your property. You know that they have an advocate that's going to help them get through the contract to close process, which we know is not seamless. It's the seller's decision, but there are certainly advantages to paying a buyer's agent commission.
Absolutely, and I think it's important to note that if a seller doesn't offer that up front, in most cases the buyer writes it into the contract. So the seller's still paying the buyer's agent, but they don't really get the credit and the additional momentum from top buyer's agents on the front end.
Right.
All right, let's see what else we have to answer. What is the significance of choice in brokerage to a buyer or seller? So interesting question, really, what does a brokerage do for a buyer or seller? And I think here at Compass, and we've both worked at different brokerages, and there's some great brokerages in DC. For us here at Compass, I think the platform and the technology piece is incredibly significant, both for our buyer clients, for whom we can provide a very visually attractive, very expansive look at the inventory. Sellers can be really dialed into what's happening in the market. And I think once either side is under contract, that platform allows our buyer and seller clients to really follow all aspects of their transaction, and allows us to stay on top of every detail. So I think that's a huge differentiator on brokerages. Maybe you have something else to add, Catherine.
I totally agree, and in fact, I haven't shared this yet, but on Sunday I was out with a buyer client who was kind of asking me, you had experience at this brokerage, and why Compass? And I asked for his feedback. I'm like, how do you notice a difference? And he had worked with another agent at a different firm previously, and he said the experience with our platform, the Compass collection, was, he didn't have words for it. He was like, it's so much easier for me. I feel like I understand and I'm more in the know. It's more transparent. And so that was really a moment for me that made me, I love Compass, but to know that our clients are feeling the benefit, I think is absolutely what we like to hear.
And it's so much easier for us to communicate with them in real time through that collection, and to make our work very efficient. So I would definitely call out collections, as Catherine talked about. It's the most visible to our clients, and it really gives them a very user-friendly interface, a very beautiful interface that gives them access to all of the currently available inventory, as well as properties that are coming soon or properties that are privately listed. So they're seeing really the broadest possible inventory and able to communicate with us in real time. And again, that's both buyer clients and seller clients. So sellers get a very ongoing look at what's happening in the market once their property is on the market, and buyers have the chance to really educate themselves and communicate with us in real time.
And I think giving access to those few thousand listings that are not public facing is a benefit to both buyers and sellers. So, all right, Compass has the largest market share of any brokerage in Washington, DC. What does this mean for a buyer or seller? Well, I think we were kind of hinting on this with the off-market listings. So for buyers, off-market listings are really helpful because they know what's coming on the market before it hits the largest audience, so it helps secure properties without competition. You have time for home inspections, you have time for perhaps a longer settlement. It's just great to have a heads up. And for sellers, it's important because we can market the property to a huge percentage of the active buyers in the market today before you're on the MLS accumulating days on market, and it just really helps keep everything secure and you just have more control.
They definitely benefit from tremendous exposure to a very broad audience, and they can do that even in advance of accumulating days on market or having any digital footprint of their pricing history.
Right.
So real advantage to sellers. All right. Can you, the buyer, visit a property once it's under contract? Seems simple, but it often creates some issues during the course of a contract to close period. So we always advise our buyers to write into the contract that between the time that they've ratified a contract and they are going to closing, we ask them, what do you need? What do you expect? Are you going to need to visit with contractors or your interior decorator? Do you want to take some measurements? We ask those questions up front so that we can put it right into the contract that the buyer is allowed up to 3 or 4 visits with reasonable notice to the seller between contract ratification and closing. And that way, everybody's happy, there's no surprises. So really important to address that up front.
Yeah. Okay, next, pocket listings have been in the news recently. Can you describe this phenomenon and how they are impacting the consumer? This is a hot topic. This brokerage really has a robust, private, exclusive pocket listings. They're kind of interchangeable terms. And I think that the reason why it's been in the news recently is others feel left out. They're not getting access. So again, it does matter what brokerage, what agent you're working with, and making sure that you have access and the agent that you're working with knows and can advise you of things that are coming on the market soon or perhaps only available to those working with a Compass agent.
Yes, I was listening to an agent in North Carolina talking about the fact that, you know, while every brokerage maybe offers the concept of a pocket or a private listing, unless it's integrated into your day-to-day platform, it's very hard to keep track of it.
Right.
So for example, in her market, their MLS allows them some form of another platform where they can keep private listings, but that's 2 different things to maintain. Compass is the only brokerage that builds our private listings into a single platform, and so it allows our buyers to see them within one space and it allows us to market them within a single space. And not just locally, but you've talked how much you like using reverse prospecting and allowing buyers and agents and their clients in other markets to see our private listings, and we can see when that happens.
Right.
What's included in closing costs? So closing costs are the additional costs of the transaction. It differs between buyers and sellers. In both DC and in Montgomery County, there are some pretty significant additional costs known as transfer taxes and recordation fees. So those generally amount to, for either party, about 1.5% of the sales price of the property. And then that's on top of commissions that are paid to listing agents and buyer's agents. That's on the well, I would say that used to be all on the seller side, but now again with the changes post NAR settlement, those get potentially shared between buyer and seller in a more significant way. Additionally, if a buyer is financing a property, you've got things like loan-related charges, you've got charges related to the actual settlement fees and title work. So it's really important in advance of starting your home search to make sure you have a good understanding of what the additional charges that you are going to be required to bring to the closing table.
It is often suggested to work with a local lender. What are the advantages of this? Well, one, in a competitive environment, it's important to be able to tell the seller it's a local lender. So, especially in the condo space, knowing that a lender, understands the condo doc review period, that they're looking into all those condo docs, and they're able to approve the building. You have approval of the buyer and also approval of the building. And so local lenders, they're familiar with the older condo buildings in DC. They're familiar with new construction condo conversions that all of those documents have just been formed. So that's really important. I think responsiveness is important, and being able to rely on someone who really understands oftentimes the timeline and needing to work quickly but efficiently and not missing any steps.
Yeah, and I think in our market, if the lender's local, it's much more likely that we've had experience dealing with them and we can speak to their responsiveness and their appraisal process and how we've been able to, they've been a real team player in getting a property to the closing table, and somebody who's local is much more likely to be able to do that. There have definitely been cases of non-local lenders where we've run into some real challenges, and the interesting thing about our contracts is if a buyer has a financing contingency, that lasts all the way through closing, and even if closing gets delayed, the buyer's still protected. So when we're representing a seller, if it's a lender with whom we haven't dealt or who isn't familiar with the DC market, there can be significant delays, there can be problems with understanding what is necessary by what deadlines, and so there's a few different ways in which that local piece is super important. When do you know a house is worth writing an offer on? Well, I have told a lot of my buyers something that I call the 85% rule. And I think when we first sit down with buyers, we tend to go through a list of not only what their wants are, but why. Why do you want this particular kind of an open kitchen? Or why do you need an extra bedroom because you're going to be, using it for a home office or whatever it may be. So I think that they can come up with a long list of what their wants are, and then we try to focus on what the deal breakers are, a must-have or a must-walk away from. After that, there is going to be likely some things that in the course of the buying process that they realize they can live without. And certain things take more priority than something else. So I think if you can get to the idea of not the perfect house, because that's very often very hard to find, but the 85% house, which is hitting 85% of the things that you know are really important to you, that house is one that you should consider seriously. The other piece that plays into it is, our market dynamics, how quickly things are moving. And that obviously changes, but I think there's that 85% piece, and then of course there's just the emotional piece.
Yeah.
Whether you feel that connection.
And I think we talk about too, we have clients who are super rigid and don't want to deviate from the perfect house, so they'll explore new construction or building themselves. And it's funny, we'll come through and they're showing us their space and they'll share, if I could do it over again, I'd have a pantry here, or I would have had a home office here. So even if you go through, new construction and building, which is a whole nother process, oftentimes there's at least something that they would change if they could do it again. So
that's right.
85%. Do you need to do a final walkthrough? Oh boy.
Oh boy, do you.
Yes. A final walkthrough occurs before settlement, and per the contract, it's in the same condition as the time of offer or at the time of home inspection. And so you really are there to walk through the property and make sure there's no surprises. That could range from a hole in the wall from the movers when the sellers were moving out, or God forbid a leak, or Lee unfortunately has experienced
flood in the basement. So it's super important that within that, probably last 24 hours before settlement, that you have that final walkthrough.
Sometimes even, we've opened closets and there are full wardrobes and just packed with, the seller didn't mean to, but they forgot.
Yes.
So it's really the last time that the seller's feet are to the fire. You can really get them to make sure everything is as it should be and taken care of.
We often come up with a lot of, so maybe wardrobes left behind, but also oftentimes stuff left in the basement or the garage, cans of old paint, other chemicals that really need to be disposed of properly, and that really is the seller's responsibility. So as you said, this is your last chance to get the seller to make sure they're delivering the property free and clear of trash and debris. And that it's broom clean. That's the other standard of the contract.
Is there a story behind a flood in the basement?
So I was representing buyers in the purchase of a home in Potomac, and there was actually a seller post-settlement occupancy after closing. So the seller stayed in the property for another 30 days. And we were scheduled to do the walkthrough the very next morning after the seller moved out. And I was home the night before, and we had a torrential rain, and I just have so much experience with rain and basements, and I thought, oh boy. So when we got there the next morning, literally the first thing I did was to go right downstairs, and the entire basement was carpeted, and as soon as I hit it, it was just that squishy, wet feeling all the way around. And so there was some work that the seller needed to do that we were able to get the sellers to do, which was to put in a French drain system, to clean out some existing drains, and to put in a new sump pump. So because the seller's obligations do not expire when you have a post-settlement occupancy, those obligations do not expire with closing. So they still had to deliver it in the same condition as it was at the time of contract, and at the time of contract there wasn't a squishy wet basement.
I think it's also important if there are, under the context of a home inspection contingency, if there are repairs, that's the time for the buyer to make sure not only the repair was done, but done correctly. Recently we had buyers purchasing a townhouse, and there was a big plumbing repair, and lo and behold, we walked through before closing, and it was not legal, it was not safe. Luckily we had our buyer bring the inspector back, and I'm just so thankful that we do that, because it really was a problem that had to get solved, and it did get fixed. But that's a really important appointment.
It's not just a pro forma. All right, last one. What's the difference between a seller's market and a buyer's market? Well, that comes down to one very simple issue, which is basically who has more leverage. And that leverage is determined by supply and demand. So in a market where you have lots and lots of homes for sale, generally the buyer has a lot more control because they have many options, and a seller really needs to be very realistic about their ability to differentiate their home and sell it for a good price. Alternatively, when there's very limited inventory, as we've seen over the past few years, that gives the sellers a real upper hand because you have more buyers competing for fewer properties, and so that becomes a seller's market. And there it is.
Thanks for joining.